Hello, the meeting is now live. Thank you. Hello, Councillor Gould. No, the meeting hasn't started yet.
Hello, Kelly. We're going to give it 5 minutes as there are 3 members of the committee on their way imminently or actually in the building.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, it's 9:05, so we'll start the meeting. Apologies for a slight delay. It's due to the traffic that we're experiencing here in Swale, and we hope that we will be joined by several other members of the committee in the next few few minutes. Can I ask for any members or officers in physical attendance with an electronic device? I've got one tonight, so I better turn it down. Mute their electronic device to avoid feedback. And ask that any remote participants keep their camera and microphone off unless they wish to speak, and ideally not use the camera facility at all, as this can affect the quality of the meeting. Please be advised that this meeting will be recorded. We are recording it, aren't we? Yep. And data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use your SBC or KCC laptops. And two of the aforementioned late joiners are with us now. Actually, we shouldn't be putting Bill there. Okay then, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Policy and Results Committee meeting, including any visiting members attending remotely and members of the public. I'd also like to advise that the following staff are in attendance in the Council chamber. Our Chief Executive, Larissa Reid. The Monitoring Officer, David Clifford, is attending remotely, and the Revenue and Benefits Manager, Zoe Kent. Democratic Services, Billy Attaway and Kelly McKenzie. Okay, I've just outlined the emergency evacuation procedure. I trust you're all familiar with it and that we can move on. If anybody does need help getting out, can you indicate now? Okay, Jem, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you. I have apologies absence for Councillor David Simmons, who is substituted by Councillor James Hunt.
I've received apologies from Councillor Jays and Councillor Carnell.
Although Councillor Jays is attending remotely but will not be able to vote. Right, can I have approval for the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June 2022, minutes 59 to 65. Councillor Tatton. Oh, you're agreeing. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, but I haven't got my glasses on. Right. Do we have any declarations of interest? There are no declarations of interest. Okay, the first item on tonight's agenda should be the proposed constitutional amendments, but I'm going to bring in the emergency item just in case Larissa gets called away. So over to you, Larissa, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I've been asked to provide an update on the current situation we have on the Isle of Sheppey. For those who don't know, who I can't believe there is anyone that doesn't know, we were advised that there was no water yesterday on the island, and this has continued today. This is due to issues with the pipe, one of the two main pipes that gives water to the island. We called an emergency. We called it as an emergency this morning, which means that we've set up the emergency room. We have some 40 staff working from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight in different roles, be it resourcing. We have staff out that are actually unloading bottles of water from lorries and distributing them to members of the public. We also have a comms cell, we have a resourcing cell, and we have emergency coordinator and assistant emergency coordinator working. We've been working closely once we said it was a major incident that does certain things. A major incident is a legal term under the Civil Contingencies Act. We've been working with DLUC Red, which is the government's emergency planning service. We've been working with all of the agencies, Kent Fire and Rescue, the prison, the Coast Guard, Kent County Council, and we've also been using mutual aid. We've been using staff from Maidstone Borough Council to help with our effort. Obviously, the bridge closing was a blow to our effort. However, there are some key issues. The vulnerable persons, we have a vulnerable persons cell, which are focusing on people with vulnerabilities. Obviously, not having any water to the prison or the prisons is a huge issue. And we've currently got water on the way there. We've also got between now and 10 o'clock, some 48 pallets of water moving to the island. We have just under 1,000 addresses on our vulnerable persons list, and they are the priority. And we're going to be ensuring that the resources tonight will start that distribution to ensure that those people get it. We've got our staff working until midnight tonight. We've got the emergency centre open until 10 o'clock tonight, and then it will open again tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We're giving updates to members at 9 o'clock, 1300 and 1800, and that will be daily until the situation is resolved. Although we are being told by Southern Water that the situation, that they are refilling the reservoirs, our processes mean that we don't cool down or stop or even reduce the resources to the emergency until we know the emergency is finished. So we've resourced fully until Tuesday morning. So we have a full complement of resources. These are not additional resources, so this might mean that members that are expecting emails from staff on different matters, that might not happen, because as I've said, we've redeployed staff all over the place. So I think that's the update. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Councillor Tatton.
No, I've staffed up until Tuesday. My hope is that we will stand everybody down way before that. But in an emergency planning situation, what I can't do is get to tomorrow night with no staff and then suddenly there is an issue. So we are staffed up all over the weekend. And the reason we say Tuesday is because Monday we can review if we need additional staff, and we can do that.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, not congratulations, but actually compliments to the way that the Chief Executive has handled this so far. My question is actually, given the, and I could be wrong on this, but to me, as an outsider from looking at it, we can do everything which we can, but we haven't got the resources or staff really to get water to an entire island. Have we not got the means of calling in extra resource, i.e. from the army, to actually get trucks out, water out, so that the people who are vulnerable all over the island actually are serviced and have a means of drinking? Thank you.
Larissa.
So as part of the process is very clearly laid down in law. We work with the two groups, the tactical group and the strategic group. And on the strategic group is where DLUC Red sit. They have links into the MOD and the Army. It would be up to that group to say, actually, we need the Army. We've set up a logistics cell that is being led by Kent Fire and Rescue, and they are looking at the logistics of getting water to the island. It will be that group that will identify. The bar is set quite high for the Army to get involved. They have to be certain that what they are doing is not what we can do. Kent Fire and Rescue are hugely skilled in this. This has happened today as a result of the emergency activation. So we will be guided. If the view is that we can't get that water, that will go back through central government, and that's when the army would be deployed. Neither me and I think Councillor Gibson, who will know much more about this than I, for the fire service, we can't ourselves ask for the intervention of the armed forces.
Yeah, I've just asked to speak, so when you're finished. Thank you.
If you don't mind, Councillor Hunt, we'll go to Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, just to support everything that Larissa has said there. And one of the key things, obviously, is a thing called MACP, which is Military Aid to Civil Powers. And that goes beyond even the first tier authorities. So you get Kent County Council within the Civil Contingencies Act, and then you'll get the borough councils, and then you'll get all the other players. So having sat on the other side of the fence and ran many exercises and looked at strategic issues, not just for the county but nationally on this particular thing, it's not quite as easy as you might think of clicking a finger and saying, and by the way, we'll have 2 Chinooks over there dropping water over there in an hour, in a day, or in a week. The wheels move really slowly. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Chair. Just echo what Councillor Bowen said there about officers. I know it's not easy working in this building in this heat, and especially when you've got something like this going on. So just thanks to all the officers that are in there and everybody working. This evening, the bridge closure, you mentioned that briefly. Do we have any update of what happened there? Because it seems to be Kent Fire and Rescue were brought in to what has been reported as pumping water. The timing of that, from what we heard, Southern Water was saying this afternoon that it's all back up and running and systems pressurising again. They said that last night, and then there was another burst pipe. But for something being planned where rush hour, the main road suddenly shut as well, those people taking hours to get back to the island and then getting there and still not having any water. Just have we got any update of exactly what happened there and why the timing?
So there were a number of issues that all with an emergency. No, that's fine. I can, yeah. Hang on one second.
Larissa.
Sorry, fair point. There are a number of issues. Things never just go one issue at a time with an emergency. They stack up. There was a plan by Kent Fire and Rescue to be able to pump water. That was being undertaken. There then was issues around whether there was road traffic safety, so whether the road needed to be closed, and there were discussions happening about that. Unfortunately, there was also an accident, and the accident exacerbated the situation, and that's what caused a lot of the problems. So there were some things where it is just the law of sod that says you do this and this is going to all go wrong, and that's what happened. So it was very quickly resolved by Kent Fire and Rescue and Highways England through KCC Highways, who were the conduit. The road was reopened, but we did still have an issue with accidents. There has been other accidents which have also led to traffic, and it's just one thing on top of the other which has caused the problem.
Councillor Bonney.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you had something else as well this morning, which was UKPN's planned outage in Sheerness, which obviously I think was the cherry on the cake this morning. So thanks for pushing forwards with the resilience group and getting them to change their mind about that and restoring power, because it's one thing having no water, but having no power on top of that all day would have been even more of a disaster. So I think communication between the utilities absolutely is something we need to ask is reviewed in future when something happens like this. But I just echo the other councillors here that our utter frustration at Southern Water's response, in particular the early stages of handing out water, which was absolutely abysmal. and their choice of location was, I mean, it shows that they clearly do not understand the island or where communities live. I just think it's an utter disgrace, and that there should be a post-mortem after this, and I'm sure all the councillors will jump on that.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being late. I think I got tied up in this. It took me an hour and 10 minutes from Faversham to get here. Coming back to what Councillor Bowen said, and I too would congratulate what the council has done so far, and equally comment similarly on what Southern Water haven't done so far. But for future reference, and I appreciate you can't just call the army in at 2 minutes notice, but have we considered for these type of problems asking the landlord groups to do anything to help us, the housing associations? There are several that have significant properties on the island, and they do have quite substantial manpower and also a reasonable amount of perhaps vans rather than lorries, but who could perhaps help on a future occasion. Thank you.
Okay. Larissa, can you come in on that?
So every emergency is different, except this is the same one that we had in 2016. So it's not that different. Yes, we do work with housing associations. We work with a number of people that have access to 4x4s, which we obviously use if there are emergencies in the winter and poor weather. We also work with housing associations to provide it's mutual aid. They will come and help us. The difficulty that we have that we've had actually today is getting people onto the island, and when they get there, the water supply is being available for people to be able to deliver. So we have worked with ourselves. So aside from what Southern Water have done, we have contacted a number of local distribution centres to try and source water ourselves for us to give to people to distribute, but all of the local distribution centres are empty and won't be full again for about another 2 days, although we are top of their list when that does happen. So the short answer to your question is yes, we do work with people. The other thing is often we tend to work with people when they're out of their own hours, because during the day the housing association vans are being used to do repairs and other things for their own tenants. So we tend to use them more out of hours.
Yeah, Councillor Tatton.
Thank you, Chair. Southern Water's representatives in North Yorkshire have been contacting me over the last 3 days saying that of the problems. My response to them, although we've been out without water, if you like, for 3 days, we've been out of getting rid of waste for 3 days. There's an awful lot of waste sitting in those pipes on their little way to the sewage farms. Are we going to have a problem like Southern Water had earlier this year regarding waste in the sea? That young lady couldn't give me any assurance of that. No comment was her comment.
Larissa, will you be able to take that one away and look into it?
Yeah, we will take that away. I don't know I have any answers, but we'll take that away.
Okay, Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Chair. No, just a quick question, thinking about Mike Henderson's question about the housing association, etc. What's the mechanism for getting voluntary groups involved, as well as CVS, or do you have sort of a main organisation that you can contact to get all the volunteers that you need?
Larissa?
So the voluntary sector is represented on the tactical command group, and they work with the VPCC cell, so that's the vulnerable persons something cell, and they are the link to coordinate all of the groups. And then what happens is the plans come down from the strategic command group to the tactical command group, who do the doing, and that's where the voluntary sector sit, and then the voluntary sector organise themselves to work in the best way possible. So it is done through that mechanism. We have also had certainly from the island offers from individual groups such as Seashells to say, actually, if you give us some water, we can help you distribute it. So, and that's fed into the logistics cell, who will look and say, actually, we can put some here, we can work with them here. But it goes through the process, and the voluntary sector are fully engaged on all levels.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me to come back. I appreciate the answer about the armed forces. I presume that would be something which you keep on the conversation going should the need arise. If this doesn't improve over the course of the next 2 days, we are looking at potentially record-setting temperatures over the weekend. What provision is there? Or is there a provision, if necessary, to, I say the word, evacuate those most needed off of the island if they are not able to get the water to them? And the other one, I saw early on a post, and again, congratulations from the Swallows, saying that they were open, that if anybody from the island wanted to use their facilities, shower facilities, that they are more than welcome to do so. Again, if it's possible, and if there is a demand, I don't know whether anyone's taken that up, but looking at the opening times, again, thinking about the weekend, the Swallows, I think, shuts at 6 o'clock on Saturday. If there'd be any way to look at those hours potentially to extend them, maybe to allow people the opportunity to maybe actually get in, maybe even use the pool, but at least potentially use a shower. Just an idea.
Larissa, is that something we can look into?
So yes, we can certainly take that forward. The idea of evacuating, that will be, so we get close to public health emergency, which is slightly different. Again, it still uses similar legislation. If it's a public health emergency, for us to evacuate, we need to evacuate people somewhere. So that would be rest centres. The people we would be looking to evacuate are the most vulnerable. So just saying we're going to open Swallows Leisure Centre as a rest centre, which we could do, is fine. But unless the care provision and everything goes with it, but that's certainly, these are the conversations that are already happening now at both tactical and strategic, to say, you know, we're almost 2 days ahead of everybody else to say the what if. So it starts there, and then we so when it happens, and as I say, all the agencies are fully involved. The plan would be to divert water to ensure to keep very vulnerable people in their own home, because for somebody that's got severe you know, dementia or other illnesses, actually to be in a rest centre, if you have, you know, specialist needs, can be really the worst thing of all. So we will always be looking with partners. It is just, you know, we are just planning to get as much water onto the island as possible.
Councillor Truelove.
So, thank you, Chair, and lots of members have really expressed very well the many concerns that we have. I just wondered, Chair, that we are the Policy and Resources Committee. We are the senior committee of the council, and I know you're doing media interviews tomorrow, and I think we ought to have a response from ourselves to the quality of service provided by Southern Water, because this isn't new. We've had it before. The vulnerability of the water supply on Sheppey was well known, and yet over the years they've done absolutely nothing to remediate that. And it's quite clear that given the possibility that this could happen, they seem to have no contingencies whatsoever for the situation we've now got. It just seems like Fred Karno's army without us doing our best to try and relieve that. And I think, I'm sure you will, but we need to express in the strongest terms that an enormous section of our population is being put through the most appalling privation at the worst possible time. And it isn't just a question of, oh, well, this was unlucky, unforeseen. It's foreseen. We knew it was foreseen, and they do nothing about it. And added to that, they are so concerned about their commercial reputation that they also put out false information or over-optimistic information during the course of this, so that you all know, last night, because they hoped they might have got it right, they were saying they got it right, and that is absolutely disgraceful, and the impact on the population is just massively unfair. So, I think I would like us to all agree that we express our condemnation of the Southern Water Company in the strongest possible terms, bearing in mind, we have at the back of our minds the fact they're discharging sewage into the sea. And I also have in mind that they told us off very sharply when Councillor Baldock and I let the public know there might be a problem about 18 months ago. Too concerned about their reputation, too concerned about being able to pay out dividends to people who have got shares in the company, and absolutely no concern about public service.
I'm going to phone a friend. Councillor Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Mr. Clifford, we can't seem to locate the raise hand button that functions, which is why we put it in the chat. I'll echo fellow councillors in their thanks to the work that the officers have been doing. I'm aware that officers have been working till God knows what time of the night, trying to assist the residents and doing their very best with what limited resource was in front of them at the time in question. And obviously a number of issues have impacted to make things worse, including the accident there on the main route into Sheppey. I think when the situation is fully resolved, we are going to need to do a full autopsy, if you like, on it. I think given that this is the second time in a 6-year period that the island has had no water supply, we are going to have to look very carefully at the contingency plans, because I think there are elements there that may not have worked as well as we would hope. I'm thinking if we're relying on the road network to get water supplies in, and the road network is as vulnerable as it is onto the island, we're going to have to look at alternatives. From what I've seen, the community on Sheppey have bound together to try and support one another, but there are an awful lot of vulnerable and those who wouldn't necessarily be on the vulnerable list but who can't carry the volume of water that they would require from the rest centres, who are seriously rationing themselves down. I've had a resident contact me who the only water that was available in the supermarket on the island was a 24 pack of 500 ml bottles, and they can only carry about 3 of those, 3 bottles, not a 24 pack. So they had to rely on the kindness of their neighbour providing them with bottled water. It's an absolute shambles from Southern Water, and as Councillor Truelove says, they seem to be far more concerned with their reputation than they are about their customers and the health of the people that they serve. And that's certainly not something that should be allowed to continue. And I would ask that the council have Southern Water in to face the full council and give an explanation and work with us to try and prevent such an eventuality in the future, and to ensure that there is an adequate contingency plan in place and that they have the resources necessary to deliver for their customers. Because as it is, it's us working through mutual aid with our partners to bail them out of what they should be processing at one of their works.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. On the front line, Councillor Ingleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to the debate. I'm actually living in those conditions. We've had no running water for 2 days. We're on the priority list. We've had no water delivered for or at all. Luckily, as we live on the island, we ensure that we have small supplies of things like water and food and petrol for the generator and so on, because these things happen. But it doesn't get away from the fact that the water company have got a monopoly. They are the only people who deliver or who provide us with water. I feel that it's important that they're held to account. I wouldn't expect people to have to go for miles to collect water. Back in the days of the flood in '53, the water was delivered to each street so that people could just walk out and pick up what they needed. This is a ridiculous situation where the first water supply was at Laysdown, which is 10 miles away from some of the areas that had it. We don't all have motor vehicles. In actual fact, I don't have one at the moment because the damn thing's fallen apart. It's only 2 months old. But I haven't been able to get out, so I couldn't go out and collect water. I think that we need to really take this company to town. We did have this problem in 2016. We had a long discussion with them, and they have done nothing whatsoever about it. You know, it's just getting ridiculous. But now we're also into the realms of public health. All these people on the island haven't been able to flush their toilets. I know ours is in a bit of a state, but this is a public health issue now. It's not just lack of drinking water. We're in serious problems, and unless something happens in the next few hours, we're going to have even bigger problems. So we need to take them to account, and I would expect a minimum of £10 million fine for them not providing the water. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ken, for that informative update for what people in Sheppey are experiencing. I've got Councillor Dendor, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Horton and Councillor Whiting, and then I think that will have to be sufficient. Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Just to add my support to what Councillor Truelove and others have said, the situation with Southern Water is absolutely disgusting, and we have got to hold them completely to account. Everybody's mentioned the 2016 incident, one pipe supplying the island, which burst actually over here, that stopped all the water going over, and yet there's no other supply to the island even now. So they're reliant on that one pipe. It's ridiculous with the population that there is across there. So I totally agree with everybody on that. I just wanted to bring it down a bit. I heard what Larissa said about, or Lloyd started about rescue centres, emergency centres. I just wonder, maybe Larissa can come back to us on that. Do we have a list of emergency centres or places that are available for emergency centres? I ask because my hall, Kempsey Community Centre, when we took it over on the lease, part of the lease, there was a covenant that if an emergency was declared, that hall immediately became available. And I wonder if we've got that kind of covenant on a lot of other buildings, and do we have an official list that we can activate once we get that far? Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, and we'll come on to the issue about what we do with Southern Water after everybody's made their contributions. Can you answer the questions that have been put so far, Larissa?
So yes, we have a complete list of every building. Some of them have covenants on them. Some of them we just ask if we can use them. We also have a complete list of rest centre managers, rest centre staff. So if we need at any time if we have an emergency, they will all be set up. So yes, we have a full list and we can activate them at any time.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you for letting me come back, Chair. There's just a couple of points, and without doing it to death, I think we all, every member of this council would reiterate everything we've heard. But a couple of points. One which we've already touched on, and certainly Councillor Denneraz and Larissa, in terms of rest centres. Kent Resilience Forum will also have that list, and it will go along with things like, because you're going to have people that are suffering from kidney problems that need dialysis machines and lots of water supplies, electricity, drugs, a whole raft of things. Can we bring pets to certain areas? Because of course, a lot of them won't leave homes because of the pets. So that's that bit. Councillor Martin mentioned alternatives to getting water across. Well, again, Kent Fire and Rescue Service within the KRF will obviously be able to facilitate things like that using their inshore craft, the boat at Sheppey, mud rescue path. So whether it's high or low tide, may well be able to do something with that. So that is certainly something that should be considered. But what I also say is, having sat on the scrutiny committee since being elected to this council, I know that Councillor Bowen, the chairman of that committee, strived absolutely diligently to get Southern Water to come and speak to us. And I'm sure that he'd tell you what the response was. As we're sitting here now, it's nil. Thank you.
Councillor Horton.
Thank you very much, Chair. I take my lead from Councillor Truelove in reminding us that this is the Policy and Resources Committee. I think there are a number of issues which have been raised here quite rightly by the council today that are policy issues that we will need to look at going down the line. And one that immediately springs to mind for me, and it is absolutely not a criticism, but a lot of the questions that we have been asking today as a council, we are asked by members of the public, and I think there is an opportunity for some sort of training for councillors on what an emergency response looks like, because many of the questions which we've asked, it would have been useful for us to have understood those answers earlier in this episode. The question I really want to come to, though, is we are the Resources Committee, and I want to be reassured that we understand the financial implications of an operation of this sort on the council, and make sure that we provide sufficient mandates to the Chief Executive and the staff who are working as hard as they are to enable them to discharge everything they need to do without having to worry too much about what the cost is. We have contingencies. This is what reserves are for, and I would want this committee to support a broad proposal that we make the resources that the Chief Executive feels she needs available to her without too much bureaucracy and debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. I'll take Councillor Whiting and then come back to that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and I agree with Councillor Horton's views there about resources, and I would hope that we are in a position to be able to request of Southern Water some sort of rebate for some of the funding that we've had to use, ratepayers' money that we've had to use to really to do their work. I wanted, if I may, quickly just to pick up, and I've not discussed it with him, but pick up on what Councillor Truelove was saying, and perhaps it would be helpful, Chairman, if there was a resolution from this committee for you to go to the media tomorrow. And I've just sort of penned something loosely, but I don't want to take ownership of it. I'm more than happy with somebody else to propose and second it, but something along the lines that this committee extends its gratitude to officers and staff at Swale Borough Council, the other agencies and the volunteers who's in the work they are doing to alleviate the plight of islanders. And this committee also condemns Southern Water's response to this emergency in the hottest days of the year. It's quite a succinct condemnation, but hopefully some thanks there for the work that so many people are doing to make it good. I just think we should put something, whether they're the words or not. I'll leave to Councillor Truelove because it was his suggestion in the first instance.
Okay. I think we've all agreed that this has been a appalling experience for the people of Sheppey, and it is something that should not be happening with a modern utilities service. I personally would like to add my thanks to staff. They have been at short notice working some extraordinary hours. There's potential that some of them will have their weekends disrupted. I think it's sad that some people have actually criticised the council's response when we've got these staff going more than the extra mile. I think there are 4 things that I would like us to consider. The first is a vote of thanks to Larissa, all members of staff involved, to the volunteer groups and everybody else who have stepped in to help in this emergency. And the community spirit that has helped keep Sheppey going. So we're happy to agree with that. Lovely. The second would be that we make it quite clear to the Chief Executive that whatever resources are needed to combat this emergency are to be made available. I'll be happy with that. I'll add to it. Yep. Oh, sorry, I need a second of the second. I think I got a second for the first one from Councillor Whiting. A second for the one regarding the resources, Councillor Bonney. We're all in favour of that as well. The third one I would like to suggest is that this committee condemns unreservedly Southern Water's response to this emergency, their failure to ensure there is sufficient water on what is one of the hottest days of the year. If anybody would like to add or amend that, Councillor Dendor? Potentially leading. Are we happy with that, Councillor Truelove?
I wonder if you could expand that a little bit, because it's not just about their response now, it's the lack of response over the previous years. I think if we could embrace that a little bit, because if we just sort of condemn their response, they'll have an answer to that. Whereas the fact they've ignored the problem for so long, that's not so easy to have an answer for that.
And their failures to have learned from previous emergencies?
Well, or implemented. Failure really to tackle the fact that Sheppey is so vulnerable because of the limitation of the supply.
Failure to have an emergency plan in place.
Yeah.
Are you getting all this, Bill?
Can I come back? Yeah.
This is an emergency. We have to do it this way.
Yeah. Yeah. We delegate it to them, but
you got to vote on it.
Can we put as part of that condemnation that actually we've had to step in and use our scarce resources when actually it should be them and their resources, and that we will be sending them the bill?
I'm coming on to that. So, Billy, would you like to give us an idea of some wording, or do you want me to come up with it now? Okay, so we generally agreed, and we'll find what the fine tuning will be done afterwards. Yep. Okay, so I believe Councillor Truelove proposed that, Councillor Whiting seconded it. Councillor Henderson?
Just to say, I think it'd be interesting to go back to the point that I think Councillor Ingleton made that we might suggest that remuneration of, I think he said, £10 million would be quite useful.
That will be the fourth resolution. So we're all agreed on the third resolution of the condemnation of Southern Water and their response. Okay, the fourth proposal is that this council approaches Southern Water for recompense and works with Kent County Council to call them to a scrutiny meeting, a joint scrutiny meeting. Councillor Truelove.
In terms of recompense, it's not just recompense to us, is it? It's to the businesses on the island that have been decimated by this.
We can publicise and make sure that everybody on the island who has been affected knows how to put in claims for compensation. I think that's something we should be doing. Councillor Dendell. Okay, reparation. That took a long time to repair, though. Okay, are we all agreed on that one? That was seconded. Okay. Yep, go on, Councillor Dendell.
Just for information, really. Since I've been at county, we've had 2 presentations from Southern Water. And since I've been with the Flood Risk Committee, the Flood Risk Committee has had another 1. So we've had 3. So why on earth they won't come to Swale? You know, I think from county we can put some pressure on them.
I think that's a very valid point. That's why I suggested we go to KCC for joint scrutiny. I can also suggest that Larissa organises some emergency training for all members. Happy with that? Councillor Valentine.
In fairness to Southern Water, I just thought we should mention that they did come to a cabinet meeting here in January, I think it was.
Okay, if that's the end of that. Oh, Councillor Bowen.
So very minor point. I'm just wondering if, and I think absolutely we should try and get back, if we can, every single penny that we've spent and that any businesses also have spent. Is there anything we can also put in terms of the heartache, for want of a better word, that our residents are suffering? Councillor Ingleton as the example. It is not a good way to live your life, and this is entirely down to Southern Water. And there should be some recognition of their failure on just human beings as people. It's not pound notes, it's not your income or expenditure, it's actually how people are being made to feel. And quite frankly, people are feeling like Councillor Ingleton's toilet. Thank you.
We can consider that when we put together the wording. Okay, I'm going to move on to agenda item number 5, constitution changes, and I'm going to ask David Clifford to introduce this item.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So moving on to this from the last item, this does all rather pale in significance, but I did just want to say to members, thank you for the vote of thanks to staff, which I know will be really appreciated by them. So this item introduces a couple of proposed constitutional changes from the Constitution Working Group. I put them together as into a single report because they are both constitutional changes, although they are completely separate changes. And I did that because I thought the second one, at the time, I thought the second one would be quite straightforward. But as we know, we have now had a proposed amendment to that. So if you're agreeable, Chair, I suggest that I take you through them, the 2 separately, and just begin with the first one. So the first one is looking at changing the rules on service committees so that amendments to recommendations in officer reports to service committees have to be notified in advance. So members will recall that there is already a requirement for that to be the case with amendments to council motions, and that for the simple reason that lawfully members making decisions need to be making those decisions based on evidence and an understanding of the implications of what they're deciding. So we've had that in place at council for a couple of years, and that seems to have worked well. It's not necessary. It wouldn't have been right for that to be the case with all the council's committees. But I think what the working group realised was that actually for service committees, there is otherwise a real prospect that amendments could be made during committee meetings that could actually have either significant implications for the council, such as financial implications, or significant implications for the borough, like social, environmental implications. And without an officer having had a chance to think that through in advance, members could be finding themselves in the position of having to make decisions where they weren't fully informed and possibly having to defer making decisions altogether. So that's the purpose of that. That in the suggested wording at paragraph 3.4 of the report, there is a waiver facility for committee chairs, which is akin to the facility that the mayor has at council meetings, so that if an amendment seems to the chair to have the committee's support, and it's clear that implications would be either not very significant or very clearly understood prior to it being agreed, the rule could be waived. So I'll leave that one at that, Chair, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Horton, then Councillor Henderson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clifford, for the report and your very accurate summation of this particular item on the report. We have discussed this as a group in some detail. We see merit in having the structure. We identify that there are things that if we had them proposed at the meeting and were unable to answer the questions, would either lead to a debate that we should have had not taking place at all, or being delayed until it could be an informed debate at a later meeting. And we don't see that either of those is a satisfactory outcome. And in the spirit of this amendment, you will notice that we have tabled an amendment to the second part of this document in accordance with these proposed rules. I support this and commend it to the P&R committee.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to the first point, which relates to amendments, while it is still allowed, I'd like to suggest an amendment to that change. If you look at this committee, there are 3 political groupings, that's Labour and the Sheppey Independent Alliance and the Conservatives, who have a number of members on the committee. There are, however, 4 groups who only have 1 place on this committee, and pretty much the same applies through all 4 of the main committees. I agree with the need to be able to study amendments, and therefore I'm happy to agree to what is being suggested by way of making amendments 2 days ahead of time, and therefore it's time for officers to study them, time for other groups to study them, and time to come and talk sense, hopefully, in the committee about them. However, the 4 groups who only have 1 member on the committee, and that's the Independent Group, the Greens, I believe it's called Independent First, and Liberal Democrats, potentially will find it difficult to look at an amendment, put an amendment together, and get a seconder for that amendment ahead of the meeting. And therefore, I would like to suggest that everything remains the same, except it should say that amendment must be proposed, but does not require to be seconded until the meeting itself, because that will be a much fairer representation for the smaller groups, both within and outside of the administration. So I hope that people will think positively about that, because it is a matter of trying to get more members involved in decision making, and this would achieve that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. It has been pointed out that you don't have to be a member of this committee to propose an amendment. Indeed, as Councillor Hunt has done, and he's substituting. But can you give us some advice on this, Mr. Clifford?
Thank you, Chair. So that sounds like a perfectly feasible amendment to the amendment to me, if that's what the committee chooses to agree. You know, we could simply say that you have to have a proposer, because you have to have something in writing, and then the committee, as you know, the first order of business on the amendment when it came to committee would be to see if there was a seconder, and the point of a seconder is simply to make sure that ideas which are suggestions which are completely out of step with anything the committee wanted to do don't unduly delay the committee's time. So that would be so doing that in the meeting rather than prior to the meeting would be a perfectly feasible way to proceed. Thanks.
Any comments? Councillor Hunt.
Only that I'm happy to second it. I think it seems like a reasonable idea.
The amendment has been seconded at the meeting. Councillor Horton.
Thank you very much, Chair. Talking to this particular amendment, I do not believe the amendment is actually necessary, because I think, with the exception of one individual who is not in a group, there is plenty of opportunity for an individual, even if there's only one person on this committee, to get a second who doesn't, I believe, anywhere in the Constitution have to be part of this committee. The downside of the proposed amendment at the moment is that we could set staff and officers working up an amendment that then arrives unseconded and is in fact way wide of the mark. At least having a second does help keep it broadly in line. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen. Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, I support that. I was going to say the same thing. We don't have a group meeting this side of the chamber to discuss what amendments. If I wanted to discuss one, I might phone colleagues and ask them if they're willing to second it. And that facility is available to all members. And as Councillor Horton points out, we run the risk of setting some hairs running and getting officers doing a lot of work in the background very quickly under short notice, when it may not be needed come the day. Thank you.
Mr. Clifford, can you confirm whether or not an amendment that is seconded by somebody who's not a member of this committee would be acceptable?
I can. I don't think it in general terms it wouldn't be. So the proposer and seconder should either be committee members or be known to be substituting at the committee on the evening of the decision. So I don't think that would really work.
Councillor Henderson.
Only to say I'm grateful for that comment from Mr. Clifford. I appreciate the theory that an amendment unseconded could set a hair running, officers do loads of work, and it then comes to the committee and doesn't get seconded, so it doesn't go anywhere. But I have to say, I think that would be extremely rare. And the fact is that the two objections which we've heard to my amendment both don't work, because if you only have one member on the committee, as in the case here now, with 4 groups represented, you can't sub somebody, because then you're not on the committee. So if we want to allow the best capability for amending and opening discussion, then as far as I'm aware, the proposal I've made is the only way of achieving that. And if not to achieve it, it will make life very difficult for the smaller groups on the council. Thank you.
Okay. If there's nobody, Councillor Whiting.
Just to come back, I really do appreciate what the councillor is saying. I just think if an amendment's worth making and it's likely to get the support of the committee and get passed, then it should be reasonably simple to phone the committee members, those committee members, even if they're not part of your group. If it's a good amendment, you will find a seconder for it within the group membership, and we can stick to the amendment as it's written in the paper. So I think for that reason I'll vote against it, not wanting to quash good ideas from minority groups, but to ensure that actually there's some sort of common sense as we move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, the motion as proposed, the amendment as proposed by Councillor Henderson, seconded by Councillor Hunt, is that we remove the words "and seconder" from the second line of 3.1.17. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. That is 7. Those against? That is 6. Well, I'm glad I'm not in the choosing point. Okay, that amendment has been carried 7-6. With the amendment, are we happy with the amendment that the rest of the policy is agreed? The rest of that change. Okay, do I need a? Yep. Okay, I'll propose that. Seconded. Yep, lovely. Councillor Horton to second. Those in favour, and that's carried. Those against and abstentions. Okay, 1 abstention. Okay, thank you, David. Can you lead us on to the second part of the recommendations?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. I will take that to the next council meeting. So the second part is, as I say, I thought this would be the more straightforward part. And the working group had a discussion about the current working of the head of planning's delegations in looking at parish council's ability to call things into the planning committee. Which is intended to be the head of planning has a veto based on whether she believes that the reasons for the call-in are based on sound material planning considerations. So the committee, the working group debated that for some time, and the resolution really was simply that if the head of planning decides that a reason proposed by a parish council for a call-in is not based on sound material planning considerations, then she should write to the parish council to advise them of that. There were other options we discussed within the working group, but that was the one that had the consensus. So that is the proposal in the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clifford. Councillor Tatton.
On that which Mr. Clifford had just said, parish councils meet once a month, and in that month period they have to have their objections available to any documents that come through from planning or enforcement whatsoever. If they come through late, it doesn't give them much time. Yeah, and the parish councils at this moment, how things stand, don't have a great deal of clout, or people give them the fairness of understanding of their area that should be given. And I don't think parish councils need to be knocked need to be educated, if you like, by the planning officers, departments, as long as they've got it right and taking in consideration all the issues that these planning apps bring in to us, if you like.
I think this has been discussed, and we are going to do some training for members and parish councils on material planning considerations so that we can get that better understood. Sooner the better, you're quite right. I was about to take the amendment. Did you want to speak to the amendment, or do you want to speak before the amendment? Okay, Councillor Dendor.
Yes, I noticed what Councillor Tatton said, and he mentioned timing. This has nothing about timing in it at all. And in my experience, having been on the planning committee for a number of years, some parish councils bring matters to the planning committee that quite frankly are a waste of time, because there are no material planning considerations in them at all. Now, I take the point of what Councillor Tatton says, maybe the parish councils need training, and I would totally support that. But what we don't want is hours and hours and hours and hours of talking through an application with objections from a parish council that actually don't know the material planning considerations that they're bringing forward. Thank you.
Can I just remind members, the constitution as currently written is that if a parish council if parish council doesn't have a material consideration, then it is not automatically called into the committee. The constitution already says that. What the change that this would be is that the office, the head of planning, would write to the parish council to confirm that there isn't a material planning change. That's the only change that that element of it has. Councillor Horton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Speaking to this particular point, thank you for that clarification. I was going to point out that this was actually not a fundamental change in the relationship with parish councils, and I would also make the observation, as somebody who's not on planning, but has observed the attendees at planning training on a lot of occasions. You can take parish councils to the training, but you can't make them turn up and pay much attention to what they say. I think requiring parish councils to understand material considerations is a fundamental part of delivering the best service we can to the residents of our borough.
Okay. Councillor Hunt, you had your hand up. Is that to move your amendment or to talk before you move the amendment?
It's to talk before I move the amendment about what the amendment is and then move the amendment.
Right, before we get to that stage then. The purpose of this amendment that the working group spent hours discussing is that parish councils get an informed response that they haven't done a material planning, given a material planning consideration. That is effectively the only real change that this would bring. So now I'm going to hand over to Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Chair. What we have been asked this evening, and this addition to inform parish councils, I completely agree with. I've got no problem with what was said, but considering it and having been on a parish council as well and been on the other side, I could just see a couple of instances that could come up, and that's why everyone's got the tabled paper. And basically what I'm asking in simple terms is that not only do the parish councils have to give a valid reason, but also us as members should be given a valid reason. And that is that never has been the case. We can just turn around and say we want to call it in and not give any information whatsoever as to a reason why. And for officers that are dealing with this, they're the professional officers coming up with their reasons and then getting us as members just saying to them, well, we don't believe what you're saying, or we don't trust you, and we want you to call it in. And I think it's wrong for us to not be given a reason. If we are going to be, and I think in the past we have had this rule with parish councils that they need to give it this reason, but we haven't really policed it as well. And if we are now starting to say to parish councils that they must do this, even if it is better that they are being notified, I think it's only right that we as members do the same. We should all be having the training and knowing what the reasons are. And that is why I have brought this forward. The other issue that we've got is if parish councils are now, it's tightened up this rule, there's no reason why we could be sort of bombarded with parish councils turning around to the ward members and saying, well, you don't need to give a reason, so you can call this in for me. And we could start getting into positions where there's a lot more pressure on members and possibly a lot more coming to committee because we don't have to give that reason. So this hopefully members will see it in the sort of the way that I'm seeing it. I've checked with officers, which is why I wanted to bring it forward first, and there's no issues that have come up that there's any reason why this can't be done. And I think it'll just be a fairer way for everybody. The only incident that could come up and a concern maybe would be predetermination, because you're asking members to come up with something particular. But from my understanding, and there's no, you're not saying at that stage that there is absolutely should be definitely turned down or approved. You're just needing to come up with something that needs further consideration. And if we sometimes with things are a fine line about an officer may be sort of swayed either way, this is just having a greater sort of look at it and more people involved. So what I'm proposing is the wording that is tabled, but the actual amendment I think I need to do to the actual recommendation, and that is to change recommendation 2 to read that we consider the constitutional change set out in paragraph 311 of the report and tabled proposal, and endorse tabled wording for recommendation to full council.
Could you also address the bottom line of your amendment?
Yeah, so yeah, and the parish councils, though, what I've also asked is when the parish council is notified, that ward members are also notified that that is the case, just so again that ward members are aware that this is happening, and they can always discuss that with the parish council if needed. And again, if we've had the training and parish councils necessarily haven't, we are also there to be able to give them some guidance and not just leaving them out in the dark with something to do.
Okay, can I have a formal seconder? Seconder, Councillor Dendor. Well, now we've got a seconder. I'll let the seconder speak.
Right.
Don't push it. Councillor Tatton.
I can understand.
Yes, Councillor Henderson, you have had your hand up for a long time, so apologies. I've moved my screen now so I can see you better.
Thank you very much. I'm pretty comfortable with either the original proposal or the amended proposal. I can see what Councillor Hunt is trying to do with his amendment, and it seems perfectly fair. I'd like to clarify one thing. We're saying in regard to members that the member will be advised, but as I understand it, that still leaves the member allowed to call in an application. Because
no,
I might.
The first change means that a member of the borough council has to give a material planning consideration in the same way that a parish council or statutory consultee would.
I clarify.
That's not what the amendment says, Mr. Chairman. The amendment simply says that in case of item 1, any member of the borough council, it says where the head of planning determines a representation from a member of the council is not based on relevant planning considerations, the member will be advised. It doesn't say that the member still can't insist on it coming to committee. And I raise this because it's an important issue. Members don't always bring things to committee because they want them turned down. Sometimes they want them approved when officers are recommending turning them down, and in which case, effectively, the member is disputing the arguments the officer puts forward. But secondly, members may often bring something to the committee because they want conditions to be changed or conditions to be put in or considerations to be made, perhaps about design or whatever. So I'd like to clarify that. I then come to the parish council bit, and I take the point that Councillor Tatton makes that it'll put time pressure on parish councils, but I have to say my view to that is tough luck. They can always make decisions over the phone or on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or whatever, and we must recognise that it's not just wasting the committee's time. The officer has to do more work in writing a fuller report if it's coming to committee than if it is being made on a delegated decision. So we are trying to reduce officer workload as well as reducing member workload, and I think that's worth doing because parish councils could pretty easily do some training to understand sound planning reasons, and if they feel strongly, they might also bother to turn up to the committees, which they very often do not.
Okay, legally, parish councils have to make decisions in public, and a decision to respond to a planning application would have to be made in a formal meeting. They couldn't do it by telephone. That doesn't mean some don't, but legally that would be required, wouldn't it? Yeah. So we're not going to suggest that at this meeting. The first line says, providing any such representations from any of the above, i.e. any member of a borough council, a statutory consultee, or a parish or town council, are, in the opinion of the head of planning, based upon relevant planning considerations. It makes it quite clear this amendment would mean that any member of a borough council who wanted to call it in would have to give a relevant planning consideration. Okay, I've got loads of hands. I don't know who's first. Councillor Tatton, of course, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think you know what my predicament is holiday sites, caravan sites, 10-month lets, 8-month lets, or those saying that they are residential lets, which bring issues to the constituents in my wards, all of them. And I need these to be considered by planning, because once Mr. Freeman was here, they weren't considered. It resulted in a couple of letters, but they were very low-key letters. And I think this year should be the year that we actually go for it and not have SBC officers turning around and say, oh, they're going to declare.
How does this relate to the amendment?
Well, if you let me finish, you might learn.
I'm looking forward to it, but if you could hurry up to that point, it'd be good.
Don't wish to hurry up. Bring it up another time.
Okay, I believe there was a hand over there. Was it Councillor Horton and then Councillor Truelove?
Because it's where he expects good comment to come from, Councillor. Thank you for that. And I think I have a couple of points I want to make about this. One, to deal with the concerns that Councillor Henderson has. I think that a councillor who understands the material considerations and thought about a way to assist the planners with a condition would be able to write to the satisfaction of the head of planning that there was good reason to put a condition on, and I think that would be a material consideration. On the broad principle, it seems to me to be an anachronism and a bit bizarre that a member of the council can just say, I want this called in, and the whole machine goes into play without some indication as to why and what the debate may be about. And of course, that's even further exacerbated if that member, for whatever reason, cannot actually attend the planning meeting, even if it is remotely. I think it is incumbent upon all of us to have an understanding of the material considerations, and I think it is perfectly reasonable for the public to see that we are making justified observations. I think the one criticism that could come up with this, and Councillor Hunt touched on it, is does it mean that you are predetermined? And I think if you are minded to put a pen to paper on any planning application, it doesn't mean that you are predetermined. It just means that you want to fully understand the conditions, the circumstances surrounding and the implications of an application. So I think somebody trying to suggest that because you have said I want this called in makes you predetermined is nonsense. But I do think it is legitimate to expect a councillor to know what they want it called in for.
Councillor Truelove.
Thank you, Chair. I can see the soundness in principle of what Councillor Hunt is proposing. We simply don't want frivolous call-ins either by parish councils or by members. But I'm just concerned that what is interpreted as a planning consideration might actually be a grey area, and there might be a difference of opinion between planning officers and an experienced councillor. I've certainly been in that situation and got something called in, and it was worthy of having it called in. So I don't think we want to risk a situation where members are frustrated because they believe honestly that a particular item has got planning considerations, and an officer says, well, that's not true, and it creates possibly a tension between members and officers, which is not very desirable. And the other thing, I just think we've got to remember we are a democratic, local democratic organisation, and we have members of the public who are anxious about particular planning applications. And if you say to them, well, there's nothing I can do because it's delegated, so officers will decide, but I can call it in so that your views are legitimately heard. And I think that leans towards making it possible for members to call in if indeed they think it is there are planning considerations, rather than create a potential hostility between member and officer, but also frustration in the public who say, well, there's nothing you're going to do then, are you? You can't, if it's delegated, you can't do it, and if it's can't be called into members, well, what's the point of voting elected members to the council? Because in the end, that's what we are trying to defend, locally decided decisions and not decisions made by officers in all instances. So I do understand that it's a sensible proposal for good reasons, but I won't support it.
Thank you. But it does reflect some of my concerns. At the moment, the head of planning can call something into committee if they think it's of interest to have a wider debate. I think that should also be something that we as members can do, and it is our committee, it is our council. I have called an application in previously, but I wasn't too strong one way or another about, but I felt that it was something that needed wider consideration. Now, I mean, we could always attach a material planning consideration by saying, oh, we think it's got a detrimental effect on the amenity of people who live in the area. Material planning consideration doesn't always mean a lot, but I also do worry about this situation that Councillor Truelove mentions, where you feel it's a material planning consideration, the officer doesn't. I wouldn't want that friction between members and officers. I just feel that, and I think it was even Councillor Hunt did point out, sometimes you're actually supporting an application and it's being turned down. You know, the officers are recommending turning it down. Sometimes you'll say, if you're going to call it in, I'd like, if you're going to refuse it, I'd like to call it in. I just think restricting that ability really puts a limit on democratic ability of members to represent their area. I don't think it's abused at the moment. I think, you know, members are responsible when they call things in. I think that's their role. So I would be a little reluctant on this one. But Councillor Bonney, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I quite agree with what you've said and Councillor Truelove said. It seems a bit bizarre that we've moved ourselves into a committee system so that we can democratically decide things in public, and then we restrict ourselves from being able to get applications democratically heard in public. I kind of understand some of the thinking behind it, but certainly from a member perspective, it's a power that I rarely use, but if I use it, it's normally for good reason, and quite often it's because you want that public debate. You want that debate to be heard in public, so people can hear the arguments for and against, and that there is a chance to look at the conditions around them. So I won't be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Lloyd, then Councillor Valentine.
Thank you, Chair. A few points on this. Similar to Councillor Truelove's point on the original motion and on the amendment. Let's wait for that motorbike to pass. For me, it's not so much the planning considerations. It's more for me the word relevant, and who determines what relevant is. Is it the head of planning? That's also where it could cause potentially friction. I do think members should be accountable and should put in a reason for a call in or referral to the planning committee. I also think, in terms, coming back to the predetermination point, Councillor Horton was right. You can call or ask, refer something to the planning committee for a number of reasons, and that's not predetermined, unless, I think, if you've been on social media or said somewhere, I don't like this application, I don't want it in my ward, then you possibly are opening yourself up to that. But as long as you don't do that, you are legitimately in line for saying, I want the committee to look at this, and these are my reasons why. My final point, and I think this is one of the good things about the amendment, is that we're saying about we want to get parish councils trained and raise awareness within parish councils of planning considerations. If parish councils are there aware that they have to put reasons in, and they can't then go to their ward members because, well, you don't have to put a reason, so you don't have to give a planning consideration, you can just do it. But it enables the ward member to say, well, what grounds are you putting this in? What is the planning consideration? And maybe, just maybe, that may spark a few parish councils to get up and actually attend some training so they have an understanding of what the planning consideration would be, and therefore won't need to approach the ward members because it's a bit different. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to take the first two amendments separately to the third amendment. Councillor Valentine.
Thanks. I just wanted to propose a very slight change to the third amendment as you're describing it.
Can we come on to that one in a minute and just stick to the first two?
Okay.
The first two are connected.
On the second amendment, well, the first two, I wouldn't object to something which says that a member has to give a reason when they give a call in. But for the reasons that have already been suggested, I think it's less desirable that the head of planning should determine that isn't a suitable reason for to be debated in planning committee.
Councillor Horton, on the first two.
Yeah, and it's specifically on the second line of the first one. We've had a conversation where a number of phrases have been used. One is material considerations, but that isn't actually what this amendment is about. It says based upon relevant planning considerations. And I think the examples that members in this chamber have given of the wider community impact, Councillor Bonney mentioned where she wants a wider debate. I think those are relevant planning considerations. It doesn't say here material considerations. I just think it is appropriate for a ward member who is calling something in or asking for it to be seen by committee, give an indication of what that reasoning would be and ought to be able to explain why it's a relevant planning consideration.
Yeah, I'm going to ask David Clifford why we use the word relevant, not material.
Thanks, Chair. The answer is I don't know. It's always been that way, but there may well have been a good reason for doing it that way originally, and I'm kind of beginning to think with the way the debate has gone. So actually, the first thing I was going to say was thank you to Councillor Hunt for the fact that he did make me and members aware that he was going to raise this tonight in advance in the spirit of the amendment you've just agreed, which did enable me to have a conversation with Flo. And her view on it essentially was that it was a feasible amendment, but it does seem to me that some of the points that have been raised tonight would actually benefit from a bit more explication from someone who really knows what they're talking about in planning terms, and I can't really offer that. So okay, the answer to the question is I don't know why it's relevant and not material, and I can't really claim to fully understand the difference. Sorry, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David. Just bearing in mind what has been said, you call it in and give a material or relevant planning consideration, and you turn up at the meeting, but because you're not predetermined, you then don't vote, and you say, well, actually, I've changed my mind. I've called it in, but I don't agree with why I called it in because I wasn't predetermined. I just think we'd have you'd have a really difficult. No, Councillor Dundee, you don't think that can happen?
It can happen, but I think it should happen. Quite frankly, you call it in for and sorry, am I speaking now in my reserved basis?
This is a bonus.
The bonus. Well, no, I think you can call it in for a reasonable. I'm going to use that word, a reasonable purpose. Yes. Relevant to me is fine. Once you've brought it in, though, you start the debate, and once the debate starts and you listen to various other people's views on it, it can go either way. You're not frozen to go for that particular thing that you called it in for, not at all. That's the whole debate in planning, is to make your mind up when you hear to other people's views.
Okay, Councillor Whiting.
Thanks, Jim. I wasn't going to speak, but I just picking up on the last point about the word relevant. Of course, that does exist in the Constitution now. So I think the reason it's in the amendment and the proposed change is because it was already in the Constitution and that had been agreed on some time ago. I am leaning towards being in favour of Councillor Hunt's amendments, all three parts of it, on the basis that at the end of the debate, there will have to be a material planning reason why you go against an officer's advice. And I think if we start the debate without recognising that, then that could be quite difficult. And I think it will expedite planning if we put ourselves in the same boat as you quite rightly say, Chairman, have already a restriction we've already placed on parish councils. And we put ourselves in the same position as them, as to come up with a relevant reason why we're asking for it to be brought forward. And it's not a relevant, in that sense, material consideration has been said. It's just a relevant planning reason as to why we want other members to consider this more widely. And I take Councillor Truelove's point, but at the end of the day, there are discussions between members and the planning officers about these matters, and to my experience they've always been resolved quite amicably, whether that has eventually come to committee or whether it's eventually not come to committee, and I don't see that friction necessarily building in the way that's been described. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I've sat here and listened to quite a lot of debate here, and as you know, I chair the planning committee, and so I've seen most things from both sides of the fence. Predetermination versus predisposition. I think it can be a very, very fine line, and it depends, as all the legal experts will tell you, on that person's mind on the evening when they walk into that chamber, whether they are predetermined or predisposed. I don't recall any time where we've had a member that hasn't given a reason, that when it's come to committee we've said, well, it shouldn't have really come. There may have been an occasion, but I can't bring one to mind at the minute, and I'll stand to be corrected on that. But as Councillor Whiting just alluded to the fact that if you're going to bring something anyway, you will have that discussion with the planning officer and say, look, I want to bring this forward, and I'm pretty sure any one of our planning officers would say, so what sort of things are you looking at? What are the issues? I don't think anybody as a member would be belligerent enough to say, well, I'm calling it in because I'm calling it in. So I don't really see any real benefits in that. I'm going to be straight on to number 3, so I'll leave that there if I may. Thank you.
Councillor Dender, would you like to second on the first 2 parts of the amendment, and then Councillor Hunt?
Sorry, the amendment that's proposed and seconded is actually the recommendation, because we're not actually proposing anything. We are just making a recommendation to full council. So I haven't actually proposed exactly the wording in the tabled paper. The amendment is to consider the constitutional change set out in paragraph 311 of the report and tabled proposal, and endorse tabled wording for recommendations full council. So if it's changing the wording on the tabled paper, then it needs to be a separate thing to be able to then make that tabled paper right.
David.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm not sure I'm with Councillor Hunt there. I wasn't aware that members were proposing it to change the wording of the tabled paper. Have I misunderstood that?
I'm not really sure, David. As I understand it, we are discussing changing a few lines in the report, and that would lead to recommendation 2 having to include reference to the tabled paper if it's passed.
In full.
In full if both bits are passed.
Yeah, that's the thing I think Councillor Hunt was saying, in full.
No, we've got a second right of reply and the movers summing up.
Okay. No, most of what I was going to say has been said, so I won't go too long on it. But Councillor Horton picked up what I was going to say. We strayed, I think, a lot off the actual amendment. We kept referring to material planning considerations when in fact the word is relevant. Relevant, as Councillor Bowen said, is to the judgment of the head of planning, which I'm sure would be a reasonable judgment. So it does live a broad judgment. It doesn't restrict it too much. But I think the biggest thing I want to say is that we strayed off the spirit of the amendment. The spirit of the amendment was to put members on the same footing as parishes. That was it. That we follow the same rules of bringing applications forward to the planning committee that parishes do. And I have to say, I totally agree with that. There's no reason we should be on a different footing. And particularly as one can apply reasonable checks, I take the point that Councillor Gibson said that he, in his experience, obviously mine's been a few more years, but in his experience that people have not brought unreasonable. I can remember a couple in previous years gone by members. But that's not the point. The point is simply putting the same level, the same footing, the same field for parishes and for members. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I won't go on too much, but yeah, something that's mentioned there was conditions, and I think has already been alluded to. That would be a material consideration and a valid reason to call it in. The differences on what a valid reason is, I think that all comes down to the training that anyone has been given. If the same officers that are going to be saying what the planning, the valid reasons are the same officers that have given us the training, we should be on the same page of what those reasons are, and there shouldn't be any instance where we come and in conflict with them. The democracy is the biggest thing, and that's what, again, this reason was. We heard here that if we don't do this and take away the possibility of us as members being able to call this in with no reason given, then we're just saying it's exactly the same thing for parish councils. We're removing that democracy from parish councils and giving them the opportunity. And when we talk about parish councils, everybody is just a volunteer that's on there, and it's down to their time to actually take this training and get that, the detail that they need for it. And we're taking away that democracy more, and I do agree that that has been the case in the past, but we are now clamping down on it, and it is just getting that equal measures that we as borough councillors will have the same as parish councillors and need to give a reason. But on the actual thing, I think, Councillor Ball, you said about taking it separately on each one, and you more wanting something removed. Is that right? On one, 2 and 3?
No, I want to take 1 and 2 together, and then I want to take a bit about the ward members separately. I think some people might support that one and not the first 2, or vice versa.
Right. Okay. So the way I've put it at the moment is that it's endorsed as.
Okay. So are we the same as parish councils? To be treated the same as parish councils. Those in favour of the amendment, please indicate. This is the first 2 lines of the amendment tabled in front of us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? That's 8. So that that part of the amendment has fallen. Councillor Hunt, would you like to propose go on to the 3rd line?
I was giving you a proposal, do I? We'll have a debate on that. The third one, that the ward member then should be notified when the parish council is advised that they have not given a material consideration. And just in addition, what I will say is that whilst Mr. Clifford said this was probably going to be an easy one, this is planning. It does just go to show with the debate that's happened, it's not as straightforward, and it's good to have that debate.
Councillor Dendell, are you seconding and reserving your right?
Second.
Councillor Valentine, then Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pose a very slight change in the wording to this that I hope Councillor Hunt will accept. So the 3rd line currently reads, the ward members for the ward of which the parish falls within will also be notified. And I would suggest we delete the word ward, the first word ward, delete of and replace it with in, and delete within. So it would read, the members for the ward in which the parish falls will also be notified. I just think it's more concise and clearer.
Yeah, but we're happy with that. But we'll do that. That's excellent. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, I too would like to make a very small change. We did talk about timing, and clearly it's all very well in relation to the previous discussion. Councillor Whiting said, oh, you know, you can chat to your colleagues and do this and that. It doesn't take too much account of the fact that members in particular, are very busy. So can I very simply ask that in relation to both ward members and parish councils, the word attached to notified should be urgently? Because certainly I have sometimes found, and I've been on the planning committee for a long while, that finding out what's happening can take too long.
Are the movers of that amendment happy with that? We all happy with that? Yeah, okay. I'll be honest, my concerns about this are simply that there is a responsibility of parish councillors to contact their ward members if they want to take something up, if they want to raise the fact that their planning reason isn't adequate. It's up to them to contact the the ward members rather than our officers in suggesting. And I think it puts ward members in a difficult position. You're informed that the parish has had their reason rejected. Are you then expected to get in touch with the parish? Is that expectation going to become what is? Yeah, and if you don't, is that bad? It also potentially, the ward member might have a different perspective. The ward member might also be wanting beyond the committee, wanting to speak on the item, but not potentially indicate their way of thinking. I'm a bit uncomfortable that ward members are going to be put in the position of contacting parish councils when it's not our officers' job to facilitate that. It is parish council's responsibility to say, right, we need to get in touch with our ward member or not, as they choose. I just think they could build up an expectation on ward members which is unreasonable. But anybody else? Oh, come on, we've got to have a debate. Lloyd.
I think you're right in terms of it is the responsibility in this case of the way I say it, of then the parish council. They are in a consultee. They have formed a conclusion, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, whatever, and they have been notified by Stroud Borough Council, not the ward member. They've been notified by the Borough Council that their decision is not going to be put forward because of relevant planning considerations. It is then incumbent on the parish council and only the parish council to then make contact should they choose to. It is not the responsibility of the borough councillors to then say, hey, parish council, come and talk to me. I've seen this has not gone the way you wanted. What can we do about it? We've got a lot of things that we have to deal with anyway. I don't think that is one that should be for us to do. The only other point I would support this one, you won't be surprised. In terms of taking Councillor Henson's point, and trying to save, if we can, a little bit of paper and the environment. If we are, when it says about writing to parish councils, I presume that is a letter in the post to land on the Kellogg's doorstep, or does that incorporate writing as in an email? If it's paper-based, then I would suggest the notification to ward members should actually go at the same time, but probably emailed to them, so they at least should get it, in theory, before any letter drops on doorsteps.
I would ask David, but I'm sure it's not really likely to know. I imagine planning email, but Yeah, but it's by email.
Certainly hope so.
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair, and I completely understand the reservation you have about does this set a difficult position for the ward member. I think it is a really difficult position for the ward member if the parish council has been told that their application is being rejected and the ward member is not cited on it, when they then get a phone call from the parish council saying what on earth is going on. I personally would want to be in the position that I knew my parish council had that disappointing news and be in a position in which I could think through the implications before I had a telephone call rather than having to do it thing. I do not think we are setting up an expectation that the ward councillors will then make contact. I think it's preparing the ward councillors for the contact they may receive. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Yes, thank you. We do exist. Just to say that I fully support actually your assertions that it should be the parish council's role to contact members, ward members, and I know you're one of them in particular, Councillor Horton, that does keep a real watch on what's going on your patch. And I think as ward members, it's incumbent on us all. So if there's a planning application in your ward, well, then you jolly well know what's going on with it. So I don't really kind of subscribe to the view that then you're caught out when a parish council rings and says it's been turned down, because for me it'd be quite simply a case of saying on what basis this right, I'll either have a look at this for you, or actually they're probably about right. And sometimes, and you know from your previous life, it's tough love sometimes. You know, you've got to say no, actually I think that they may well have it about right. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Dendell, would you like to give your reason or reply or whatever it is?
Yeah, sure. There's one question I'd like to ask before I sort of do my reply, and that is if the parish, if it's turned down or if it's advised not to call it in, does that email or communication go on the portal? It's a very simple question. If it's on the portal, because I look at the portal every single day, if that communication is on the portal, then I'm fine that I can see it there. I look at my district all the time to see what's on there, but I'm not sure that that kind of communication would actually be on there. So that's a question. But again, the principle of this, yes, I totally agree with. The ward member should, you don't have to take any action, but you want to know what's happening in your patch, yes? And I don't see that this is an onerous task. As we said, an email, simply when you send out the letter to the parish, you simply send a quick email out to the ward member. I don't see that as onerous at all. So, you know, I don't see this as a real issue and I totally support it.
Councillor Hunt, yeah, summing up.
This was the easy bit.
Okay, those in favour of the amendment, please indicate. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? 5 abstentions. That amendment, that part of the amendment has been carried. So we now go to the substantive. Can we agree the changes with the tabled amendments included? I'll move that. Who seconded it? Councillor Hunt. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you.
You have opinion.
Agenda item number 6, forward decisions plan. Are we happy with that? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's similar to what I think raised at other committee meetings, that a forward decision plan this evening only covers what's actually on tonight's agenda. I would have thought at the very least on a forward decision plan for this committee, we would have had when fees and charges and when the budget for next year is going to be coming forward, because they've got to come, and they're missing. That was the only point. Thank you.
Mr. Clifford? Sorry, I should have asked you to introduce this report as well. Would you like to introduce it?
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, clearly it's a fair enough point, Councillor Bowen, but you know the processes for these committees are still bedding in, and I think most of the service committees forward plans that they've seen have had some future items on them. Sorry that this one hasn't got any, but obviously we'll have a complete forward plan for the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, are we happy to accept the forward plan? Agreed. Right, agenda item number 7. Before we go into that, I think Larissa's got a quick update for us.
Members will possibly receive something from residents saying that there is another leak. It has gone out from Southern, looking like it's gone out from Southern Water by tweet. It is a fake. It is not true. We have sent something to all members in the process. Lauren's doing it now, but there will be some people that will get messages saying we've just had this. They've been sent to individual people. We don't know who sent them. We know it's not Southern Water. We're sending messages out to all members now. This has only just happened in the last 10 minutes. So if you get any concerned residents, you can say with total certainty that it's not true and it's a fake post.
Thanks, Larissa. And thanks, Lauren, for being available at 9 o'clock to do our social media. Agenda item 7, the handover report. It's an item for noting. Are we happy to note that? Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point on it under 313, if I may. Energy rebate scheme. I've had a couple of cases of this, but I noticed the form on the website says a deadline of the 31st of July, and that's worried a number of people. Can I have it confirmed that there is definitely a deadline to take applications by the 31st of July? Having seen on here that it will take several more months to process them. Thanks.
Zoe, would you like to be able to come in on that?
Chairman. Yes, we have got a closing date because we need time to action all the applications. We've sent reminders out to everyone. I think it was in the region of 7,000 reminders went out last week in 2 batches to everyone. We've got staff to help people to complete the application form. If people don't get it in by the 31st of July, that doesn't mean they don't get their payment. Their payment goes onto their council tax account. It doesn't go against any arrears or anything. It is just there as a payment, and at any time they can ask for that to be refunded. They can use it against their council tax if they would like to, but it is there to be refunded. So everyone who's entitled to receive a payment in a Band A to D property will receive it by the 31st of July.
Right, Councillor Henderson. Oh, you put your hand up. Okay, so with that, are we all agreed to note agenda item 7? Agreed. Ah, right. That's a beautiful pink sky out there, and only I can see it. Right, agenda item 8, council tax reduction, permission to consult. Zoe, would you like to introduce this one?
The council tax support scheme has been in place since 2013. Since December 2017, residents have gradually been moving on to universal credit from other benefits. Our current scheme is not viable in the longer term because we are unable to automate the information that comes in from the Department for Work and Pensions, and this is slowing down the application process for residents. The current scheme is both complex from an administration perspective for staff, and it's complex for customers to understand. We are seeking your approval tonight to consult with the public and major precepting authorities on the application for a banded scheme for the authority.
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank all of the people involved, Mrs. Fillery and Zoe, for bringing forward this paper, and I am led with the it beggars belief we haven't done this before, quite frankly. It is the most sensible suggestion I think I've heard in a long time. The implications at the moment are the most minute change in an individual family or an individual circumstances require a complete rethinking and a complete resetting, or may do, of their council tax reduction. It's a complete nonsense and a massive bureaucracy that our staff are having to deal with. I fully support this proposal, and I'm sure the residents of Swale will do so when we consult with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. If there's no other speakers, are we agreed to the recommendation on page 19? Yeah. I will propose it. I keep getting told I've got to get proposed a second. Councillor Horton has seconded. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Agenda that you finished for tonight, Zoe? Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. Agenda item 9, slight problem. We haven't got Lisa or Phil. David? No, I think it's Larissa.
It's not a problem at all. You've got me. So unfortunately, Phil is very poorly with COVID. He has tried. However, I'm sure you will understand in full Phil style, I have every answer to every question that man has ever asked about finance. You can test that one. But so I have any answers to all of the questions that have been asked. This is an important report because it does set out the outturn of 21-22. We set the budget, we monitor the budget, and this is the final stage of the process, which is setting out the outturn. You will see that we have a revenue underspend of 104,000. The items on in the report set out on page 30 exactly what the variances were, and you can see that there are different variances for services that have gone over budget and services that have got under budget, and also the grants that we've got, including the COVID grant, which has brought a total underspend of £104,000. The report's also asking that you give delegation to the Director of Resources to allocate the uncommitted underspends of the budget to the budget contingency reserve, and also that we look at the capital slippage of 9.394 million and capital expenditure of 6.082 million against the revised budget as detailed in table 4, and also to approve capital rollovers of 8.85 million as detailed in appendix 1. If members have any questions at all, I have answers if they do.
Okay, I will formally move all 4 recommendations. Councillor Horton.
I'll second that actually, and speak now if I may. I spent a considerable amount of time with Mrs. Fillery going through the report in some detail, and there are a number of line items that she gave a detailed explanation to, and I said, rather than me ask the questions in council and go through it, we agreed that probably the best solution was for her to give an introduction. She said it won't be me because it will be Phil Wilson, and unfortunately he is not here. I do not want to go through all of those questions again, but can I just ask that we circulate the document that was prepared as the briefing so that members have those answers, because otherwise we're going to be I was going through it with her for a very long period of time, and I don't want to do it again. Particularly since it places people who don't really possess the understanding with the requirement to answer. So can we just circulate the answers that you provided with?
Yep, that's been agreed by the Chief Executive. Any other questions? Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, I'd come to a similar conclusion in a sense. I do have one or two queries on capital because on the surface we appear to lose about £500,000 of the capital budget, but I have not yet had time to speak to Lisa about it, but I'm perfectly happy to pick up those questions with her, and if she wants to circulate the answers, I'm sure she'll do that.
Lovely, we can get that done, can't we, Larissa? Yeah. Okay, so Councillor Bowen.
So it's just on those 2 points. Don't mind from another councillor, but if so, the purpose of the Policy and Resources Committee is the last committee to then take almost of the workings of all the other committees and this one to the next full council. Will we have the answers to those questions circulated before full council next week? Because if we don't, you're going to have a long debate, potentially a long debate again.
Larissa?
Have them here, so they will get sent out first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you.
Just a clarification on that. No. Yeah.
That's true also, but I do have the answers.
And you're still getting them.
Whether you want them or not.
Okay, so with the promise of a full inbox tomorrow, I'll move his recommendations. Councillor Horton has seconded them. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Those against? Those abstained? One abstention, Councillor Dendor. Okay, moving on to agenda item 10. Which are the recommendations for approval from the Swale Joint Transport Board. You have them tabled there. Any comments on those? Councillor Horton.
Just, and this one is probably for Mr. Clifford. When we have recommendations which come to us from another place, will we in the future get 2 sets of recommendations, ones which are going through P&R to full council and one for resolution at full council, or do we only get ones which are for resolution by P&R?
There you go, David.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure there'll be that many going on to council, but when they do, they will have to go through P&R. So that, and I think we'll have to mark the fact that they're separate. I think there's a wider question about the extent to which P&R are able to simply agree recommendations on the basis of minutes, as opposed to looking at full reports. In the case of what's in front of you, I think it's absolutely fine, but I think we've probably still got to somewhat bottom that one out with Dem Services, but we're working on that. Does that help?
Thank you, David. That helps very well. Okay, so with that, are we all happy to approve the recommendations from the JTB? That's agreed. Right. The agenda item 11 is the notes for Planning and Transportation Policy Working Group. As you've only received those this evening, I've been asked if we can take a 15-minute break. So I have agreed a 15-minute break, if that's agreeable, to read and inwardly digest this. Councillor Dendor. So yeah, your mic for all the members on the board.
Sorry, it refers to minute number 178, and that we are going to be asked to note and approve and publish. But I can't recall seeing an Appendix 1.
Yeah, Appendix 1 is the LDS. Can we get that printed?
It's not on the web with the minutes.
Okay, it's because it's part of the report, not the minutes. So we can get a printout of Appendix 1 now, the LDS. So we'll extend it to 20 minutes so that we get the printout and you get time to read that and the minutes. Councillor Hunt?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to say this is just one thing that hopefully David Clifford can look at, because this is something that we're making a decision on. And even though the Planning and Transportation has seen all the documents, it's still this committee that needs to see all that information that we have seen to be able to make that final decision. So it's something that with other committees, when working groups do bring something to a committee, all that information does need to be made available rather than just a minute to agree. Yeah.
Did you?
Chair, I fully agree with that.
Thank you. Okay, well, you will get some goodies to read and we can all be back at 21:35. You can all thank Councillor Whiting for this break.
To be fair, Chairman, I didn't ask for
Agenda item 11, the recommendations from the Planning and Transportation Policy Working Group. You'll have seen them. You've now got a copy of the Swale Local Development Scheme. The proposal is that we note and agree the actions as minuted. So first resolution is that the action notes be amended as minuted. I think that should be minuted as amended. Right, then there's a report about the levelling up and regeneration bill. The recommendation is that that report be noted. And the final one is that the content of the report on the LDS be noted, and the LDS contained in Appendix 1, which you've now got, subject to the inclusion of the Council's interim Park Homes SPD, be approved and published. I'll take a risk. I'll move those recommendations. Councillor Bonney has seconded them. Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a simple question. I don't think you can answer it now, but back to me if you can't. In the Appendix 1, it mentions Sittingbourne Town Centre and Milton Creek. I understand that's going forward as just Sittingbourne Town Centre. And in minute 178, I think it is, I note that a member had brought up the issue that there would be a separate SPD for Milton Creek. But it doesn't appear to be an answer. So can you answer that? Or
yeah, that is a correct recollection of the meeting. So I would propose that it just lists the currently adopted SPDs under 4.2, Sittingbourne Town Centre and Milton Creek, as per 2010. Now there are going to be updates, and we are at 6.6. It says we are intending to prepare the following documents to support the local plan review, the Sittingbourne Town Centre SPD. So that's why the Milton is mentioned previously, because that's the existing one as it stands. I believe there is an intention to do a Milton SPD, but I don't know if it's going to be in time for this. Councillor Hunt.
It was the question that I raised, but what I was told that it will become forward as a master plan and not an SPD.
Councillor Dendor.
yes, I mean, could I ask what extent that will include? When we say Milton Creek, do we mean the whole of Milton Creek, all the way up to the Swale?
It's a good question. I haven't a clue. That will be something that obviously we'd have to work through as the working group coming back here, and it'd have to be entered into the timing of the officers and what they're planning to do. So I can't give a specific answer other than it's in the pipeline.
As you know, I'm chair of Milton Creek Country Park Trust, but I've also, as with other councils, have an interest on the whole key line all the way down Milton Creek on the other side, plus the various footpaths, the PROWs on that side. So there's a whole extensive number of things down that end.
I think we can ensure that all councillors have a chance to input into the SPD when it comes forward. It will be a lengthy process. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair, and I don't want to over-labour a point, but of course, had we seen the documentation beforehand, I'm fairly sure that Councillor Dender would have declared his interest at the time that you called for it, and proper papers would help. Thank you.
That point is noted, and if necessary, we can include that in the part 4. Yeah, declarations of interest. Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm very grateful to Billy and the Chief Exec for making the papers available. I really do appreciate that. My only question was about resources. This is the Policy and Resources Committee. Just some reassurance from the Chief Exec that she does have the resources to be able to. I read it in here in passing, and I just wanted to hear it from her that she's got the resources that she needs to get this local plan to where it needs to be in the timeframes that have been set with all the various changes and the changes the government will be throwing down at us from above as well during the next 18 months or so. Thank you.
I will ask Lewis Wonder first. I will not ask her to crystal gaze what the government does in the next 18 months.
So, all things being equal, we have the resources that are required. We've brought in additional resources. We have the resources required to do the work that we need to do now. In the event that that should change, we would obviously come back to this committee to set out those changes and ask for any additional resources that are required.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, I'm looking over that side of the room. Okay, in that case, can we agree all the recommendations that are in the report? Hang on, I'll propose it. Seconded, Councillor Bonney. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. And safe journey home.